You can see what my titles are. I've recently retired, but still doing technology things all the time. So I'm going to talk about engineer who becomes anesthesiologist. I was a Cornell electrical engineering student in 1965. It was the first year that Hewlett-Packard Medical had co-op students, and I was recruited by Hewlett-Packard Division, Medical Electronics Division in Waltham, Massachusetts. I developed one product every summer. At Cornell, I created a scanner for x-rays. I think that was the first x-ray scanner ever built anywhere. And I decided to go to medical school and find more problems to solve. Now, medical school had summers off, and I continued my HP engineering and learned that anesthesiology was dangerous, that bad outcomes were about 1 in 3,000, and that there were big problems to be solved. And I decided to become an anesthesiologist once becoming a physician, because that was an important area that I could contribute in. During my residency, inhaled anesthetics were the most common, which they still are, in fact, in the US and the world. Keddy in 1950 had explained how they moved around the body, but this was a qualitative description. As an engineer, I wanted to quantify that. And as a bioengineering fellow, it seemed like a good idea to do that. And I went to the MGH, Mass General Hospital Bioengineering Lab, where I learned from Ron Neubauer and Jeff Cooper. Jeff Cooper created the critical incident study of measuring problems in all sorts of patients, and Ron Neubauer led me in multi-frequency thermodilution, which we invented there and patented. And I learned about clinical incident collection that Jeff had been looking at, with breathing circuit disconnection being the great killer. It was the killer, and it was something that we had discovered was that simply by interviewing anesthesiologists and saying, when was the last time you had a patient have something go wrong, and how did it happen? And in that analysis, we discovered that it really was breathing circuit disconnections. So shortly thereafter, I joined the faculty at the Peter Ben Brigham Hospital, later to become the Brigham and Women's Hospital, newly to become Mass General Brigham Hospital as of today. And Leroy Van Dam encouraged me to start my own laboratory. And with Dan Raymer, whom I hired, I created an inexpensive infrared CO2 monitor, the first one that had ever been built. And we licensed that to PerkinElmer for its mass spectrometer, so it was going around to 16 rooms or 31 rooms, and meanwhile, it would come back and check that the patient was breathing every 9 minutes. Well, 9 minutes is too long to hold your breath, and certainly too long for my patient to hold his breath, so we created a qualitative CO2 monitor that could be connected in every room. We licensed that to PerkinElmer, and that was very nice, but we needed to get agent monitoring more often and to understand how that was working. And I started doing the math of the inhalation kinetics and looked carefully at Seymour Keddy's description. That had been written in the journal Anesthesiology in 1950, where he described how anesthetics come in through the mouth and nose and go to the lungs and carry around, as Philip Payton's talked about and others have talked about today, and did it in a very qualitative way, but very carefully descriptive, and decided that it should be simulated exactly the way he described it, and if so, it could then be learned by every anesthesiologist. That was when I got a grant from the Apple Educational Foundation, because I wanted a picture and a graph, and the Apple II could do that. It could write the picture while it was showing the graph, or vice versa, and educationally, I decided that was what we would need. And I spent 1,000 hours writing the software code for that, to do what Keddy said the body was doing, and then spent another 1,000 hours writing the workbook that would walk the learner through every step of the way, from the basic science of it to how it all worked clinically. We studied users in 2 institutions, the residency program at the Brigham where I was, and at Monmouth Medical Center, a little on the Seacoast, New Jersey residency program that had a different quality of residents than we had and a residency program that did not stay in business for a long time. But we wanted to look at the two extremes of medical residents to understand whether we could teach them, and we demonstrated that both of them had significant and almost identical improvement in knowledge, skills, behavior, and attitude, the key points of education that one must always test. And we published that in the journal Medical Education, and it was the first program published to be successful in medical teaching. Everyone before then had failed one way or another, but we had designed this in a way that it should be the good educational tool. Addison Wesley then published Gasman as a book and computer simulation in their medical nursing division, and a year later they closed that whole division. Well, we had shown that computer simulation at the IARS meeting, where I had was in the forefront of the Addison Wesley booth demonstrating this, and all of a sudden people started coming around, like Professor Eager and an entire team with him looking at it. I had presented to Dr. Eager the day before that meeting in his office in San Francisco the original book and computer program so that he would have it, look at it, at which point he told me no one had ever done this successfully before. Many had tried in his laboratory and it hadn't worked. So I felt very, very good that this was that first example of it. So here's what Gasman looks like. Raise your hand if you're familiar with Gasman. Raise your hand if you are not familiar with Gasman. Great. So we have the right distribution here to make it worthwhile for me to talk about it a little bit. Pointer, no. Pointer, yes? Nah, I won't do it. So we have across the top, we have the various compartments from the vaporizer output to the breathing circuit, CKT, to the alveoli, to the arterial blood, vessel-rich group, muscle and fat, and then returning and venous return. The connections between these compartments are below, placed between them in the picture, so that we have fresh gas flow carrying agent from the vaporizer to the breathing circuit. We have alveolar ventilation carrying it then to the lungs, and then we have cardiac output carrying it away. And each of them can be adjusted at any time, and we're looking on the far bottom right here at the time that the clock has been going, the uptake in milliliters of anesthetic, or milliliters or liters of vapor, or dollars of cost. And that which is delivered and that which is taken up, to look at each of those. The kind of things that we then had others study that we had nothing to do with were demonstrating that the model is either correct or incorrect compared to patients. Professor Ravi Shankar, Dean of the medical school in his city in India, and head of the anesthesia department there, as well as being the dean, did this paper where we see that the data in Gasman and the data in real patients is almost identical, consistently within 10%, and most of the time still closer than that. Most of the errors, it turned out, were in the number of significant figures shown on the agent monitor compared to Gasman, and that's why those jumps are all those little sizes. So even though this model wasn't as good as the wonderful ones that others in this very room have developed in the past, this simple model managed to match patients almost identically all of the time and consistently. The accuracy, again, in these papers, including groups in this very room, have studied that carefully and identified that it's an adequate model, and we don't have to go further until we really want data to possibly control things in real time. We will use the better models that will be coming out. And teams of viewers, this was one time at an ASA meeting demonstrating this, where I had a group, 3/4 of which are in front of you right now at this very meeting, looking at it at the Gasman booth. I created a booth to try to get people to use this from. Now, you'd think this would be something that I would want to make money on and doing things of that sort, but no. This was designed to be an educational effort. It's a non-profit corporation that I then developed within a year of that, where I made sure that the only thing that I was getting from this is the feeling that I'm teaching what an engineer should be teaching within medicine. The kind of things we could look at, here's a recent one where, actually not so recent, where we're just looking at the anesthetic level being held constant and beautifully and done with a high fresh gas flow and low fresh gas flow that any user can do by doing experiment number 23 or so in the workbook, where it's one of the things that one walks through very simply that way. Here's an example of something recently that I presented at a meeting. This was asking the question, how high a fresh gas flow should be used during anesthesia induction? And the answer is, if you look, this will point well enough. If we look over here, we see with a fresh gas flow, so what we're looking at is the level in the patient's vessel-rich group of anesthetic, and we're looking at it when it crosses 1 MAC, and we see with a low fresh gas flow of 1 liter a minute. This takes a long time to get there. It looks like it's 10 or 11 minutes. If we go to 2 liters a minute, it drops down to 6 minutes a liter, 6 minutes. If we drop down to 3 liters a minute, we get it down to 4 minutes. And if we go any higher on the fresh gas flow, it doesn't speed things up at all. It's not worth it to be at that fresh gas flow. Residents produced lots of experiments and a few published manuscripts. We learned that with an inhalation induction with halothane, if the patient becomes apneic, they wake up because the drug goes out of the vessel-rich group, it goes out of the brain, the patient wakes up with halothane when the airway is obstructed. With sevoflurane, the patient doesn't wake up. So it turns out in an inhalation induction with sevoflurane, one has to worry about airway obstruction to make sure that it is a self-relieving phenomenon. For one thing, something we never would have guessed. One day a resident said, Dr. Phillip, tomorrow we're working together with the drug desflurane. Is there a simple way we can give it? And at home I said, I don't know, let me do a few simulations of gas mask. It took me 2 minutes to realize that what the textbook said of using a high fresh gas flow and with the vaporizer going up 2% with every few breaths and working your way up to an inspired of 9% to get the expired gently up to 6% was a wonderful technique that we can do with complexity. Or if we turn the fresh gas flow to 1 liter a minute, set the vaporizer to 8%, then inspired goes up and expired goes up and it's perfect. We gave the anesthetic that way the next day, and I did it that technique for the rest of my desflurane career for the next 20 years. It was the easiest way to do it, and it could be described after doing a simple simulation. That's the fun of GasMan. And it's free and downloadable online, and the workbook comes with it, and it means that anyone can use it. This is what I just said a moment ago with that speed. So on that note, I want to end and say thank you.